Curiosity drew her higher into the mountains, past the whispering pines and over ridges that seemed untouched by time. Evelyn Hart had never meant to come this far alone. The letter she carried, creased, stained by a tear that had fallen on the train ride west, was meant to lead her to a boarding house in the valley. But when the snow began to fall, and her horse lost the trail, she pressed forward, guided only by the faint smoke that rose between the white peaks. By the time she reached the cabin, her fingers were numb, and her breath came in short, frightened bursts. The door opened before she could knock. A man stood there, broad-shouldered, his face shadowed by the brim of a worn hat. His eyes, pale as the sky before a storm, studied her like he was deciding if she was real. "You'll freeze out here," he said finally, his voice low, the kind that made silence sound heavy. He didn't ask who she was, only stepped aside and let her in. Heat struck her like a wave. The small cabin smelled of cedar and firewood. She stumbled toward the hearth, holding her hands to the flame until she felt the sting of life returning. The man moved quietly, setting a kettle to boil, his every gesture careful, deliberate. When she found her voice, it came out hoarse. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded without meeting her eyes. "Storm'll last the night," he said. "You can rest by the fire." She looked around. One chair, one bed, a table scattered with tools and papers, all neat except for a book left open near the window. The man's presence filled the space like another wall, solid and unyielding. "My name's Evelyn Hart," she said softly, hoping the sound of it might bridge the distance between them. He hesitated before replying. "Silas Boone." His name carried the weight of the mountain itself. She'd heard it in town, whispered in the corners of the inn where gossip was served with supper. They said he was wealthy, a man who'd struck gold and lost everything that mattered soon after. A man who preferred the company of silence to people. As the storm thickened outside, Evelyn watched him work in the firelight. He moved with the precision of someone who'd long been alone, who found order in the simple act of surviving. Yet something in his stillness made her uneasy, not fear, but awareness. When he finally spoke again, it was as if he'd read her thoughts. "You shouldn't have come up this way," he said. "These hills don't take kindly to strangers." "I wasn't looking for kindness," she said. "Only quiet." He looked at her then, really looked, and for a moment she saw grief flicker across his face like a shadow passing the sun. He turned back to the fire. "Quiet's easy to find," he murmured. "Harder to live with." The kettle whistled, and he poured tea into a tin cup, sliding it toward her. She took it, her hands brushing his for a fleeting second. The touch startled them both. He pulled away quickly, his jaw tightening. "You should know something," he said, voice roughened by something that wasn't just cold. "I don't keep company. Not because I'm cruel, but because I can't control myself around people anymore. Too much was lost. Too fast." His words should have frightened her, yet they didn't. Instead, she felt a pang of understanding, the kind that comes when two wounds recognize each other. "I don't think you'd hurt me," she said. He gave a short, humorless laugh. "I wouldn't trust that thought too long." Night deepened, pressing against the windows. The wind howled like a living thing. They sat in the flicker of the fire, silence wrapping around them, not heavy this time but almost tender. Evelyn wanted to ask what he'd lost, but something told her not to. Whatever it wasn't a story told lightly. When she finally spoke again, it was to keep the quiet from swallowing her whole. "I used to think the city was where life happened," she said. "But it just kept getting smaller. People talking, judging, deciding who I was before I could." Silas listened, eyes fixed on the fire. "The mountains judge too," he said. "They just do it quieter." She smiled faintly. "Then maybe I can stand their company." Something softened in him. He reached for a log, fed it to the flame. "You can stay till the storm breaks," he said. "After that, the trail will be clear." But the storm didn't pass by morning. Or the next. Snow layered the world outside, turning the cabin into an island of warmth. They fell into a rhythm. She cooked simple meals. He repaired the roof where ice had cracked it. Words came in fragments, not stories but glimpses, She'd once been engaged, left behind for someone wealthier. He'd once had a brother who died in an avalanche up the same ridge. Both spoke with the detachment of people too used to loss to expect understanding. Yet, somewhere between shared silence and the slow crackle of firewood, understanding found them. She began to read aloud in the evenings, from that book she'd noticed. Poetry about forgiveness, about the way love outlasts even snow. He would listen, head bowed, fingers curling against his knee like the words were digging through his chest. One evening, the lamp sputtered, and she rose to refill it. When she turned, he was beside her, hands steadying the glass. Their fingers met, then lingered, too long, too real. His breath hitched. Her heart stumbled. Neither spoke. He stepped back first, the old restraint pulling him away. "You should sleep," he said quietly. She looked at him, eyes shining in the lamplight. "You don't have to be afraid of me." He froze. For a moment, she thought he might tell her everything, about the rage, the grief, whatever ghost kept him alone. But he only said, "I'm not afraid of you. I'm afraid of what peace feels like. It never lasts." The fire cracked sharply, scattering sparks. Outside, the wind began to fade, replaced by a hush so deep it felt like the world was holding its breath. Evelyn turned toward the window, watching the first hint of dawn blush against the snow. Behind her, Silas moved quietly, placing another log on the fire though it hardly needed it. She sensed him watching her, the way one watches something fragile, unsure whether to reach for it or let it go. When she finally turned back, she smiled, gentle and tired and full of something new. "Then let it last for now," she whispered. He didn't answer, but his shoulders eased, and for the first time, he looked less like a man trapped in winter and more like someone remembering spring. The storm outside had broken. Inside, something else had begun. When the thaw came, it was almost unnoticeable at first, the snow softening at its edges, the icicles dripping like tiny clocks counting down to something inevitable. Evelyn woke to the sound of melting, that delicate rhythm of change, and felt a strange ache in her chest. For days, she and Silas had lived inside a world made of firelight and breath, but now spring pressed against the windows, urging decisions neither wanted to face. She could feel him pulling away before he said a word, quieter at breakfast, distant in his eyes, careful again with every movement, as if he was preparing to unlearn her presence. He spent the morning outside mending the fence that the storm had torn down. Evelyn watched from the doorway, his figure a solitary mark against the dissolving white. There was tenderness in the way he worked, but also tension, like a man bracing himself for loss. When she walked toward him, her boots sinking into the softening snow, he didn't look up. "You should go down to town soon," he said. "The roads'll open by week's end. Safer to leave before the rivers rise." The words fell between them like stones. "You want me to go," she said quietly. He wiped his hands on his coat. "What I want doesn't matter." "You think this was just weather keeping us," she said, almost laughing though it hurt to speak. "That when the snow melts, I'll forget what I found here?" He turned then, his face shadowed by a sadness too old to name. "You found a man who can't give you anything but silence," he said. "I'm not built for what you deserve, Evelyn. I know what it is to lose control, to hurt people you meant to protect. The best thing I can do for you is let you leave while you still can." Her throat tightened, but she didn't argue. She'd learned enough about him to know that shame was the only master he still obeyed. That night, neither of them spoke much. The fire burned low. She sat at the table, tracing circles on the wood, while he stood by the window watching the dark hills. When she finally rose to go to bed, he whispered without turning, "You've been kind to me, more than I earned." She wanted to tell him that kindness was the only thing he'd given her. Not his wealth, not his protection, but that quiet, wordless gentleness that had made her believe peace could exist. "Instead," she said, "I hope you learn to forgive yourself someday." Then she went to bed with tears she refused to let fall. By dawn, he was gone. She found her horse saddled outside, her small bag strapped behind the seat. The air was damp with the promise of spring. She stood there for a long while, looking at the trail that wound back toward the valley. Then she mounted up and began to ride. The snow cracked under the hooves, The forest whispered goodbyes she couldn't bear to answer. Halfway down the ridge, the wind shifted. Clouds rolled over the sun, and the faint warmth that had touched the morning vanished. A storm was brewing again, sharp, sudden, unseasonable. Evelyn pulled her coat tighter, urging the horse forward, but the path blurred. Behind her, thunder rolled like the growl of a restless god. She turned back instinctively, heart pounding. Silas. He'd be up there alone, fixing the roof or mending fences again, always fighting what didn't need to be fought. She turned the horse around. By the time she reached the ridge, snow was falling thick, furious, erasing her tracks as quickly as she made them. She saw the cabin through the haze, smoke struggling from its chimney, and then she saw him, out by the pasture, trying to tie down a broken gate that the wind kept wrenching free. "Silas!" she shouted, her voice half stolen by the gale. He looked up, shock flashing across his face as she dismounted and ran to him. "What are you doing here?" he yelled over the roar. "Saving you from yourself," she cried. "You'll freeze out here." He shook his head, fighting the wind. "You should have kept going. Not without you." The gate broke free again, slamming against the post, and in that chaos of snow and breath, she reached for his arm. He grabbed her hand without thinking, holding her steady. For a moment they were both still, the world a blur of white around them, their eyes locked like two people standing on the edge of something too big to name. "Evelyn," he said, voice cracking. "I told you. I can't control myself around you." She stepped closer until she could feel the heat of him through the cold. "Then don't," she whispered. "Just feel." The words undid him. The rope slipped from his hand, forgotten. He cupped her face, snow melting against her skin, and kissed her like he'd been waiting all his life for something that wouldn't destroy him. The storm roared, but inside that moment there was only warmth, the kind that burns away years of loneliness. When they finally pulled apart, breathless and laughing, she pressed her forehead to his. "You fool," she murmured. "You thought you were saving me. But I came back to save you." He smiled, a rare, quiet, unguarded smile that seemed to lift the years from his face. "Guess I wasn't worth saving," he said. "You were," she replied. "You just forgot how it felt." The storm began to ease as quickly as it had come. They walked back to the cabin hand in hand, their steps slow, as if afraid to break the fragile peace that had found them at last. Inside, the fire had burned low, but he coaxed it back to life. The flames leapt, filling the room with gold, and she leaned against him as warmth bloomed once more. Days turned into weeks. The snow retreated down the slopes, revealing green beneath. Evelyn stayed, helping him plant seeds in the thawing soil, her laughter mingling with the river's song. The town below whispered still, the recluse and the city woman, the scandal in the mountains, but neither cared. In the hush of early evenings, when the sun slid behind the peaks, Silas would rest his hands over hers and simply breathe. One afternoon, as they sat outside watching the fields shimmer in light, Evelyn said softly, "Do you still think peace never lasts?" He turned to her, eyes gentle. "It lasts," he said, "when you stop fighting it." She smiled and leaned into his shoulder. The scent of pine and earth filled the air, the same world that once felt cruel now tender and alive. In the distance, a hawk circled the open sky, free and unhurried. Later that night, when the fire crackled low and sleep began to pull her under, she heard his voice, quiet and certain beside her. "You brought the spring early this year." She reached for his hand, finding it easily in the dark. "Then let's keep it," she whispered. Outside, the mountains sighed with the soft wind of renewal, and inside the cabin, once a place of exile, warmth lived again. The storm had passed for good.